Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Let me recognize Senator King, please. Oh, excuse me. Senator Warren has just arrived. Are you ready, Senator Warren? Is that a maybe? Senator Warren.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the nominees for being here today. And Dr. Adams, if I can, I'd like to start with you. You're nominated to oversee nuclear weapons program for NNSA, which puts you in charge of projects that are complex and dangerous and also very, very, very expensive. I've been a critic of some of NNSA's work because of the agency's record of waste and mismanagement that has cost taxpayers billions of dollars over the years. So I want to ask you about one of these pricey projects that isn't going very well. We're modernizing our nuclear weapons program, and that includes producing new plutonium pits, which make radioactive raw material that we need for nuclear weapons. In 2015, Congress set a requirement to produce 80 pits per year by 2030, a big increase from our previous level of no more than 20 pits a year that we had been able to produce. Dr. Adams, will we reach 80 pits per year by 2030?
Thank you for that important question, Senator. The current estimates by NNSA are that we will not reach 80 pits per year by 2030.
Yeah. So I understand these are complex projects and the original estimates may have been off, but I'm deeply concerned that we're not even sure how much increased pit production is going to cost us. The estimated budget for this work at just one pit production site doubled over the course of just a couple of months. We've thrown money at this problem, but the head of Strategic Command recently told this committee, quote, even unlimited money, unquote, will not get us to 80 pits a year. Dr. Adams, do you agree with Strategic Command that the problem facing pit production can't be solved by just throwing more money at it?
Thank you, Senator. I agree that we can't get to 2030 just by throwing more money at it. Get to 80 by 2030 by just throwing more money at it.
Okay. Well, it's clear to me there are a lot of reasons that pit production isn't meeting the goals, including that the goals may not be sustainable. But lack of funding is not one of the problems. Admiral Richard is a big supporter of more pit production, so if even he says more money won't fix this, then obviously we need to rethink our approach. So, Dr. Adams, if confirmed, will you review the current pit production plan and advise this committee on what would be a more sustainable and achievable path?
I certainly will, Senator.
I'm glad to hear that, because I think that sticking to the current plan just defies common sense. It is unfathomable to me that NNSA would not reconsider the plan, and I hope that you will give this issue a serious look if you're confirmed. It's no secret that I think that our nuclear weapons policy is dangerous and unsustainable. But even those who want these weapons to occupy a more prominent role in our national security should be able to agree that continuing to waste billions of dollars in pursuit of an unachievable goal makes us not more safe, it makes us less safe. So I hope that the upcoming nuclear posture review gives the President real options to reduce nuclear weapons spending, including a path to scale back NNSA's modernization plans. We're going to spend more than $630 billion over the next 10 years, and that spending is only going to rise if we double down on plans that we know will not succeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield. Admiral Richard, last year you testified before this committee that you hope the nuclear policy review would include looking at the wide array of capabilities we have in our arsenal, including space and cyber. In other words, our ability to deter adversaries is not only about nuclear weapons that we have, it's also about conventional weapons and other areas of strength. And it sounds like the adoption of integrated deterrence that will be part of this review does precisely that. Was Strategic Command fully consulted and able to fully participate in the nuclear posture review process?
Senator, first, I want to endorse the idea of integrated deterrence. STRATCOM and previous commanders have been calling for this, the idea that you use every available instrument, not beyond the military, to best deter your opponent and resolve political issues at the lowest possible level of violence. So we are strongly in support of that. Second is to understand, though, that nuclear deterrence in particular is a part of integrated deterrence. They're not different things. In fact, if you don't have the nuclear piece inside of it, the rest of integrated deterrence doesn't work because your opponent might be able to...
Forgive me for interrupting, Admiral. I understand this. I'm just asking a question about process. Was Strategic Command fully consulted and able to fully participate in the nuclear posture review process?
STRATCOM was fully involved in the nuclear posture review process up through the Secretary of Defense. I had plenty of opportunity to tell the Secretary personally. We led portions of the nuclear posture review, but beyond that, ma'am, I don't know.
Okay. Now, as we discussed last year, the nation's nuclear policy is up to the President and the Secretary. And the goal of a nuclear posture review is to rigorously examine options to determine the proper role for nuclear weapons in our national security strategy. So, Admiral Richard, do you agree that the nuclear posture review benefits, let me put it this way, from hearing a wide variety of views to make sure that we are developing the smartest possible policy?
Senator, yes, and my responsibility inside that is to offer the operational implications to each of those wide range of views.
Okay, and do you think our nuclear policy should be informed by objective technical analysis?
Ma'am, we provide a lot of that objective technical analysis.
So you think it should be? It should be informed by technical analysis and a broad variety of views. We're in agreement on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. You know, I'm looking forward to reviewing the nuclear posture review when it's released. But the reason I'm focused on this is because I have concerns about the process that produced it. Over the past year, the Pentagon has repeatedly pushed out and obstructed efforts to have more rigorous debates and analysis to support this review. And I just want to give one example of this. The ground-based strategic deterrent is a $264 billion program. I requested that DoD contract with a respected group of outside experts to determine the technical feasibility of extending the Minuteman III program instead of just buying expensive new weapons. I was then told that the DoD didn't have the contract authority to do so, and that's just simply not true. It appears DoD simply didn't want to do a study that might show that a massively expensive nuclear spending program wasn't actually necessary. Now, my view on this is no secret. We must reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our defense strategy. It's dangerous and it results in a staggering amount of spending, more than $630 billion over the next decade. But no matter what you believe about these weapons, our nuclear policy should be developed by asking tough questions, not formulated in an echo chamber. So, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, can I suggest that I look forward to the nuclear posture review being published so you can see exactly how and what it concluded. But I will add, thank goodness we have ICBMs right now. I'll explain more in closed testimony.
So I'm glad that you're looking forward to seeing the report. As I said, I am as well. But my whole point is that if we don't have a process that includes alternative points of view, a widespread point of view, then the product that comes from it is too likely to come from an echo chamber instead of being fully informed. And that's what troubles me.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here today.
Senator Ernst, Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Kurilla, welcome to you and your family, and congratulations on your nomination. I'd like to focus on one of the topics that you and I discussed when we met last week, civilian casualties. I think everyone in this room can agree that U.S. military operations kill far too many civilians. In the past 2 decades, the United States has killed tens of thousands of innocent people, including hundreds of women and children across a half dozen countries in the Middle East and Africa. Now, we'll likely never know the true numbers, given the difficulty of accurate reporting and the Pentagon's failure to fully investigate reports of civilian harm. This has been the unfortunate reality of U.S. military operations, despite congressional oversight, despite dozens of watchdog groups raising the alarm, and despite documenting the harm, and despite DOD's own efforts and attempts at reform designed to improve how it protects civilians. So, General, you've been nominated to lead the United States military operations in an AOR that has seen the lion's share of these casualties. Civilian casualties, obviously, they destroy the lives of those affected, and that alone is reason enough for reforms. But would you also agree that these civilian casualties harm our credibility abroad and fuel the very insurgencies that we're fighting against?
Senator, they do.
Good. I mean, that you recognize this. Do you want to say more about that?
Senator, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. I know that there is a process right now down at CENTCOM. If confirmed, I would look to see how I can improve upon that process.
Well, you know, it's clear that we do need reforms, and I'm glad that you want to focus on this. But instead of tackling this problem head on, the Pentagon has repeatedly weakened accountability for civilian casualties. Most recently, there was reporting from the New York Times that detailed a secretive U.S. task force that used loopholes in the law to sidestep safeguards that were designed to protect against civilian casualties. The Times also found that DOD prematurely dismissed many civilian casualty reports at the assessment phase without doing basic due diligence, like internet searches or searching in Arabic. General, do you agree that any credible reports of civilian casualties deserve the Pentagon's full attention and thorough investigation?
Senator, I do, and I think the Secretary of Defense's new civilian harm mitigation and response plan of action that he's asked to come back in 90 days from 27 January, if confirmed, I would look to be able to participate in that to make the process better.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're committed to full investigation. We'll see what happens with the reforms. You know, it's clear that additional reforms are needed. I have ideas on that front. I'm sure there are others. I'm not alone in this. So let me just see. I know we have a report coming out, but General, if confirmed, will you commit to prioritizing reforms that will mitigate civilian casualties resulting from U.S. operations and improving accountability and transparency at the Pentagon on this issue?
Senator, I will.
Good. I really appreciate it, General, and I want to say thank you. You know, I've said it before, but it deserves repeating. The system is broken. We cannot accept the deaths of innocent civilians as just an unavoidable cost of warfare. It's long past time that DOD addresses the harms that U.S. military operations have caused and implement meaningful reforms that de-emphasize lethal force and prioritize civilian lives. I have already asked President Biden to incorporate these ideals into his upcoming counterterrorism review. But, General, if confirmed, I think you're going to have an opportunity to set the standard for protecting innocent lives and actually implement some real change here. So I look forward to working with you. I hope we can make some improvements in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Let me recognize Senator Tillis, please.
Senator Warren is recognized for 5 minutes. Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director Chopra, on March 28th, you gave a speech in which you focused on repeat offenders, not the little guys, but the giant banks and corporations that repeatedly break the law even after regulators have imposed fines, consent orders, and lawsuits. Now, this is a really serious problem, and I want to talk today about one of the worst repeat offenders in our entire financial system, Wells Fargo. In 2016, Wells Fargo's fake account scandal was exposed. The company's leadership had squeezed their employees to create 3.5 million unauthorized bank accounts. Director Chopra, do you recall how much Wells Fargo was fined in 2016 for this fake account scandal?
I want to say it was $185 million.
That's right, including $100 million of that was from the CFPB. Now, that was a big fine, and CFPB and other regulators were right to impose it. But keep in mind that Wells Fargo booked more than $5 billion in profits that year. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that a fine alone was not enough to persuade Wells Fargo to follow the law. Because over the next few months, the following scandals came to light. Wells forced consumers to buy unneeded car insurance. They changed information on customers' documents without authorization, and they illegally repossessed cars from service members. In 2018, the regulators finally said enough. And under then chair of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen's leadership, the Fed put a cap on Wells Fargo's growth. Now, that was pretty shocking at the time, but it still wasn't enough to get Wells to follow the law. Since that time, Wells has closed customers' accounts without authorization, damaging people's credit reports, and just to rub salt in the wound, continued to charge them overdraft fees even after those accounts were closed. Wells has also been fined by the SEC for recommending unsuitable products to mom and pop investors. It put up to 1,600 customers into forbearance without their consent. And just a few months ago, Wells was hit with another fine by the OCC and a new consent order because the bank is still screwing over consumers. It appears that cheating customers is simply in Wells Fargo's DNA. Director Chopra, the asset cap on Wells was a much-needed step, but it's clear we're dealing with the baddest of the bad here. What other steps should regulators consider to hold Wells Fargo and other corporations that break the law over and over to hold them accountable?
Well, I don't want to comment on any specific case, but here's what I see. I see federal enforcers and regulators are very quick to lay the hammer down on small guys and small businesses. They will name people individually. They will ban them from certain business practices and often criminally refer them for prosecution. But there is a totally different standard for large firms who break the law over and over again. Yes, they do pay a fine, but often it is less than the profits that they made from the misconduct. We have to look at a broader array of remedies. In banking, the Federal Deposit Insurance Act talks about limitations on FDIC insurance. There is asset caps like we see that the Federal Reserve Board did or that the OCC has done. We have to look at structural remedies that stop the law breaking from continuing. Fines are not going to solve this with the biggest players. And frankly, I think if we care about equal justice, we should treat small firms and large firms the same.
I agree with you. Thank you. I think it's clear that fines have just become a cost of doing business for giant corporations like Wells, and we can put a stop to that. The Fed has the power to break Wells Fargo up, and they should use it. And in addition, I'm reintroducing my Corporate Executive Accountability Act to hold big bank executives personally liable when the companies they run repeatedly break the law. Look, we're not going to get any changes in corporate America unless we change the rules for repeat offenders and their CEOs. And I appreciate your leadership on this, Director Chopra, and I look forward to working together with you. I also would like to address the comments from my Republican colleagues who have accused Director Chopra of a, quote, hostile takeover of the FDIC, a coup, and a lawless overreach. You know, they can call it whatever they want, but here are the facts. The previous FDIC chair acted in violation of the FDIC's bylaws to block the committee's majority and she chose to resign when it became clear that she didn't have a leg to stand on. We need regulators who are going to follow the law and who are going to use their authority to safeguard the financial system, and I'm glad that we have that kind of regulator now. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kendall, I want to talk about this proposal to retire 33 F-22s that's part of the Air Force's budget submission. Now, I got to say, my ears perk up anytime the Pentagon talks about wanting to cut costs, and I am inclined to support you on this. But how we got here is a real problem. So the F-22 is a fighter jet designed to establish air superiority over enemies like Russia. The Air Force started buying them from Lockheed Martin in 1999 and said we would be using them until the 2060s. Secretary Kendall, you're Secretary of the Air Force, but you used to run the acquisitions program for the whole Pentagon. So I know you know all of the issues behind this. When the Air Force started buying F-22s in quantity, was the testing and development for this aircraft complete, or were we still figuring out a number of its major capabilities?
You raise a great question.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid I don't know the answer. I was there for the F-22 Milestone B decision, the decision to start development. I was not there for the production decision.
Okay, but
I understand where you're coming from, and I think it's really an interesting thing to pursue. The ones we're retiring are less capable. You know, they were the first ones we bought, and they didn't have the full combat capability. So it would be worthwhile to go back and do the case study to understand why that is the case. We have a similar problem with F-35, where a lot of our earlier aircraft need a lot of modifications. And I know you're going to go to my acquisition malpractice comment.
You bet I am. But let's unpack this a little bit as we go forward, because it's my understanding, and I think the record shows pretty clearly, that we started buying these planes before we had uncovered all the design deficiencies and capability shortfalls that had to be fixed in order to make them work the way they were supposed to work. And these are very expensive planes. So we spent $6 billion on them. The GAO now estimates we're going to need to make upgrades that will cost $11.7 billion, nearly double what we spent to buy them in the first place. And I understand why the Air Force decided that was just too much and you want to retire these planes. And frankly, I applaud you for making the tough call. But the F-22 is not the only program where we've seen this problem. The GAO thinks we will have purchased a third of the F-35 fleet before testing is complete. And I appreciate the capabilities of the F-35 and the role that they are going to serve in the military, but the process gives me pause here. Secretary Kendall, you know where I'm going with this. You called the F-35 program, quote, acquisition malpractice. Can you just say a word more about what you mean by that?
And what I meant at the time was that the decision to enter production was made before any flight testing of the production prototype. And so we didn't have data to verify the design. It wasn't a stable design. And we should have, my rule of thumb for aircraft programs is you should have about a year of flight testing under your belt, at least, before you commit to production. As good as our digital models are and as more sophisticated as they get, we just push our designs to be as close to the edge as possible. And we often push for more performance than we've had before, so our models aren't as good. And there's always this tension, Senator, between people who are really, really anxious to get the new product. You know, they want that new wonderful airplane that's coming out, and they don't want to wait another 2 or 3 years to have you finish the design and then put on it the upgrades that are coming. The other factor that comes into it is that almost all of our aircraft evolve over time to respond to the threat. If you look at the F-16, for example, it's gone through a number of different models. You look at the F-15, the same thing. The F-35 is now going through, its technology refresh 3, and it's entering its Block 4, level of sophistication. And part of this is that the threat keeps changing, and part of it is that technology keeps changing.
Look, Mr. Secretary, I understand that. When the threat changes, and we have to make adjustments, I totally get that. But I wouldn't buy a car from a car company that said, we're not sure if we figured out all the details to keep this thing from bursting into flames, but don't worry, we're going to go ahead and sell it to you, and later on you can buy the parts that will keep it from burning up. I think you have it right when you say we need to fly before we buy. Otherwise, we just run the risk of not only flushing money down the drain, but time and effort that we put in this direction. So now we're replacing the F-22s, the ones that we're scrapping after having spent $6 billion on them, with the next generation air dominance program. I just want to make a point about this program. It's largely classified, and that may be necessary, but it also means there's going to be even less oversight over this program. No public reports, less public scrutiny from the GAO and from the DOD IGs and from the press. And this lack of transparency means the process that we've already seen fail us becomes an even riskier process. So I see that I'm out of time. I would like to talk to you more about how we estimate the costs around this, but I would like to urge you to rethink this question about making it more transparent what we're doing in the development of this new product. The American people are willing to pay what it costs to keep us safe. We want cutting-edge technology. But they don't want to be in the position of flushing more money down the toilet because we were out purchasing something before we even knew if it would work. So that's my request, Mr. Secretary.
I think you're slightly overstating the case with the F-22 because those earlier models were of use to us operationally and have been up until this time. It's not that they have no capability or that they have a defective design. It's just not upgraded to the state that we need to meet the current threat. And it would cost, I think my number is about $2 billion to upgrade those aircraft, $50 million apiece roughly, and it's not a high enough priority for us to do relative to other investments.
I know we're out of time, but I just want to say it was sold as a $6 billion airplane that was going to meet these specifications and accomplish these ends, and now we're being told it would cost $11 billion extra to be able to meet those qualifications. That means there's something wrong in the process.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
Thank you very much.
Senator Mendes, Senator Warren from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to ask specifically about military assault weapons like the one that was used on the 4th of July to kill 7 people in Highland Park. Now, Congress should reinstate the assault weapons ban to keep these guns off our streets, but we shouldn't be shipping them to just anyone overseas either. In fact, companies need license from the federal government to sell assault weapons overseas. These are called export licenses. But in 2020, the Trump administration made it easier to get that permission by putting the Commerce Department in charge instead of the State Department, where those permissions had always resided. This shift is important. The State Department has deep expertise in foreign instability, human rights abuses, and terrorism. The Commerce Department specializes in promoting U.S. industry overseas, even the gun industry. In the 2020 campaign, President Biden promised to reverse the Trump decision and put export control back with the State Department, but as of today, that has not happened. So, Undersecretary Estevez, how many billions of dollars in assault weapons sales has Commerce approved since it took over export control in March 2020?
I will have to get back to you on the exact amount, Senator, so I'll get you that.
Do you want to do an estimate? I think your records show
I think the website shows 15 billion or something.
15.7 billion.
Across all types of weapons, not just assault weapons.
So Commerce approved $15.7 billion in weapons sales in its first 16 months on the job. And by comparison, the State Department, when the State Department was making these decisions, it approved $12 billion on average in the same time period, including some weapons that never got transferred to commerce. So if you do the math, that's about a 30% increase. Now, that is a huge boon to the gun industry. The $15.7 billion in commerce-approved exports is nearly as large as the current size of the entire $19 billion U.S. gun manufacturing industry. Export control law gives commerce a lot of authority to disapprove license requests, including if such weapons sales threaten our national security or undermine our foreign policy. So, Undersecretary Estevez, how often since March 2020 has the Commerce Department actually denied the gun industry's requests to export these assault weapons?
So, Senator, a couple of things. And it's a small percentage. And again, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head. But can I answer a couple other points? State Department is part of my review process. State Department can stop a sale.
I'm asking, now that you have the approval process, what have you done? How many have you disapproved in that time period? Do you know the number?
I do not know the
It's
number.
0.4%. That is less than 0.5% of the applications are disapproved, which sounds a lot like the Commerce Department is rubber stamping these license applications, including to places like Mexico, where corruption puts these weapons in the hands of criminals, or the Philippines, where there are multiple reports of security forces shooting civilians. Now, President Biden has stated clearly that he supports cracking down on assault weapons, both at home and overseas. So let me ask, Undersecretary Estevez, can you explain how increasing assault weapons export licenses by 30% and turning down less than 0.5% of applications is consistent with the president's stated objectives? Is the Commerce Department working for the president or working for the gun industry here?
Senator, that also includes sales to people like Ukraine that are using those weapons against the Russians.
I have
right
no
now.
doubt.
So this is an interagency process now that it's moved to Commerce. There's a power of the Department of State that brings states' jurisdiction to that discussion, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Energy.
So wait
it's
a
an
minute.
interagency process that approves gun
excuse
licenses.
me, Undersecretary.
It's not just the Commerce Department.
Excuse me. What happened is authority was transferred to the Commerce Department. And what has happened is that it has a minuscule disapproval rate, and the weapons sales have gone up dramatically. Look, the Commerce Department is helping put more assault weapons in more hands, and this needs to stop. It's time to put overseas gun sales back in the hands of the State Department, where someone can exercise better judgment over it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Nobody on your side, right? Senator Warren of Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, not content with buying up hospitals and newspapers and single-family homes, retail chains, and pretty much everything else under the sun, private equity has now set its sights on a new moneymaker, Americans' retirement savings. Over the past decade, private equity has hoovered up companies that sell life insurance and other retirement products. And today, private equity firms control more than 10% of all life and annuity assets in the United States, despite having had almost zero presence just over a decade ago. Now, these new private equity-owned insurers have developed a particular taste for workers' pensions. Under this model, called the Pension Risk Transfer, or PRT, transaction, private equity giants like Apollo are buying up pension obligations from big employers like JCPenney and Lockheed Martin and Alcoa. At least 300,000 Americans today have pensions that are managed by private equity firms. Mr. Seitz, you run the office inside the Treasury Department that oversees insurance products. So I want to ask you about the safety of these Americans' pensions. So let's say someone retired from a company like JCPenney or Alcoa, and their pension was transferred over to Athene, Apollo's insurance arm. Would you say that the retiree's pension is just as financially secure now that it's managed by a private equity owner insurer as it was before?
No, thank you, Senator, for that question. I mean, we share your view on the importance of this issue and recognize the importance of pensions to millions of Americans that are relying upon those for their retirement and a dignified retirement. And we are working closely with the NAIC and their regulatory considerations as they look at their framework and how to best address not only changes in the PE sector, but also, as Commissioner Brain mentioned, more broadly in the life insurance sector with regard to their investment and liquidity.
Well, I appreciate that you care about these issues, but that's not the question I asked you. I asked you, once there's been a transfer to Apollo's insurance arm, are the people who are covered just as secure as they were before the transfer? That's easy. Yes or no?
The individuals, when their policies are transferred, as Commissioner Brain mentioned, they're covered by the individual state guarantee funds, and it's an area of focus for our office to make sure that the state system is being, regulatory mechanisms are being designed appropriately to reflect these new transactions, and we appreciate.
I'm still not hearing a yes or no. You know, just to make clear, in a September 2021 report, the Federal Insurance Office, which you run, stated that, quote, PE owners may use investment strategies for their owned insurance entities that have heightened credit and liquidity risk profiles as compared to other market participants, end quote, and, quote, tend to hold a more significant proportion of investments in alternative or non-traditional insurance assets that are associated with illiquidity and complexity premiums, end quote. You still agree with what you said?
No, thank you, Senator. We have articulated those same points in our letter to Chairman Brown a few months ago, and it's an issue that we are focused on in our office, and we appreciate the changing investment portfolio of those companies as well as across the broader life insurance
All right,
sector.
in other words, there's more risk.
It's an area of increased focus for our office, and we're looking forward to.
Look, exposing Americans' retirement savings to more risk is exactly how private equity makes its money. Riskier and more complex investments mean that private equity-backed insurers can jack up their returns and their short-term profits. But the pensions are more vulnerable to being wiped out by a market downturn, which endangers the insurance company's insolvency. This is not hard. This is just how the pieces work. For example, 1/5 of Athene's portfolio is invested in risky asset-backed securities and leveraged loans made to companies that are already highly in debt. And even worse, many of Athene's risky investments are created or managed by the parent company, Apollo itself. This means that Apollo collects fees on the investments that it directed its insurance arm to make. So look, this is a problem of more risk, and the risk is borne by people who have invested for all their working lives in their retirement security. And I want to underline the word security. My Stop Wall Street Looting Act would strengthen private equity disclosures to empower investors and help regulators crack down on self-dealing. But we also need federal and state insurance regulators to step up and address the risks that private equity poses to pensioners and workers. I appreciate that Treasury and NAIC are looking at this issue closely, but enough studying. It is time to act. And I'm looking forward to working with both of your offices to ensure that happens. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last month, President Biden made the historic decision to cancel up to $20,000 in student loan debt. And this is going to deliver life-changing relief for as many as 43 million middle-class, working-class Americans. It's going to be nurses and truck drivers, nail technicians, and millions of people who are not able to finish their degrees. So while families are breathing a sigh of relief, corporations that made billions of dollars off a broken student loan system are now busily laying new traps in a shameless last-ditch effort to try to line their pockets. Navient, one of the world's largest and worst loan servicers, is now leading the way. According to reports, immediately after the cancellation was announced, Navient sent multiple emails to borrowers encouraging them to refinance their federal loans under Navient's private lender, Navi Refi, with the promise of lower interest rates. Now, Ms. Gittleman, your organization has a long history of protecting consumers from student debt scams. So I want to ask you, let's say a borrower decides to take Navient up on their offer and refinances their federal loans with a Navi Refi tomorrow. What would this mean for cancellation under President Biden's plan?
Thank you, Senator Warren, for the question. If they refinance with Navi Refi, then they will essentially be replacing their federal student loans with a private student loan. Because only federal student loans are eligible for cancellation, that means they may no longer be eligible for that cancellation. That's a huge loss for borrowers eligible for cancellation, but Navient only mentioned this in the fine print at the bottom of those emails.
So they could be forfeiting $10,000 to $20,000 worth of debt cancellations. In other words, right after the president announced student loan cancellation, Navient sent out notices to people who could be eligible, encouraging them to refinance so they would not be eligible for debt cancellation. Now, we don't know at this point exactly which borrowers Navient sent these emails to, although I have sent a letter asking for more information from Navient. But it appears that instead of sending borrowers information to help them get the cancellation that they may be entitled to, Navient pushed borrowers toward loans that could, at best, complicate their ability to get cancellation. Ms. Gittleman, does Navient make more or less money if its borrowers get their loans canceled?
The future of Navient's lending business depends on its ability to take the most credit-worthy people with federal student loans and refinance them into private loans. Every borrower who is debt-free as a result of President Biden's action is one fewer prospective customer for Navient. More broadly, the better the deal the federal government offers borrowers with federal student loans, the less opportunity Navient has to sell people its private loans.
So I just want to underscore what you just said. Every borrower who is debt-free is one less borrower for Navient to profit from. I think that was a fair summary. Is that right? So no wonder Navient is trying to steer borrowers away from cancellation. Look, this is outrageous behavior, and it's why I sent letters to Navient and to other loan servicers yesterday, asking them what steps they're taking to ensure that consumers receive timely and accurate information about their loans and their eligibility for cancellation. By the way, this is not the first time that Navient has been caught trying to take advantage of borrowers. Between 2009 and 2019, there were at least 10 incidents where Navient or its corporate predecessor, Sallie Mae, was accused of or fined by federal and state regulators for actions that ripped off borrowers, including steering borrowers to repayment options that actually made it harder for them to pay back their loans, failing to report borrower complaints, and harming disabled veterans' credit reports. Policymakers need to keep a close eye on servicers to ensure that borrowers are protected as they await debt cancellation, and I'm going to continue fighting to make sure that happens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 6 of the 7 banks who are here today, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Truist, U.S. Bank, and PNC, jointly created and own the nation's most popular peer-to-peer payment platform, Zelle. The banks market Zelle as, quote, fast, safe, and an easy way to spend money, end quote. That is only partly true. It is definitely fast. Zelle is fast. Zelle is easy. And they increase bank profit margins, but Zelle is not safe. Last year alone, Zelle users were defrauded out of about $500 million that we know of. Now, you built the system, you profit from every transaction on the system, and you tell people that it is safe. But when someone is defrauded, you claim that's the customer's problem. We do oversight on the banking committee, so I want to know exactly how big this problem is. In July, other senators and I wrote to ask you how many fraudulent Zelle transactions your customers have reported since 2018. Only Mr. Rogers of Truist provided the data. 52,000 claims of fraud totaling $46 million. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for being transparent. But the rest of you stonewalled. So today I get to ask you in person. Do I have any volunteers who want to go first and share the numbers that I asked for in July? Or will I just pick volunteers? Okay, Mr. Diamond, you represent the largest bank here today, so let me start with you. You didn't provide any of the information that we requested in our letter, none of it. So what I want to know is that because you don't keep track when your customers report fraudulent Zelle transactions, or is it because you do keep track and you know exactly how many fraudulent transactions have been reported and you want to keep that report a secret?
I deeply apologize that we didn't give you the numbers you asked for. I'm sure we responded, and we pay anything that's unauthorized, we do cover. So you're really talking about authorized transactions that we have an enormous amount of systems to stop, and the amount of fraud relatively is very small for this free of charge service.
I very much appreciate that you're going to give the commercial for Zelle, but if I don't have the numbers, I don't have any way to verify that.
You're going to get them immediately, okay?
You want to give me a ballpark right now?
I don't have the number in front of me.
Do you know generally? This is a serious problem that's been going on in this bank.
I will get you the number immediately. I don't want to make it up.
Well, I don't want you to make it up either, but I don't want you to wait another 2.5 months before I get to see. It's very simple data.
I promise you by the end of the day today, you'll get it.
Terrific. All right, we'll get it by the end of the day once nobody's here to talk about it. How about you? Mr. Scharf, do you have numbers?
I don't here. I apologize for not getting it to you, but we'll get it to you immediately.
Does anybody here have numbers? Yes, Mr. Cesari, good.
First, I apologize that we didn't get you the numbers. We transact about $1.1 billion a month, 3 million transactions, 0.07% have fraud involved.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that's not the number I asked for. The number I asked for is how many customer fraud claims have you received? Mr. Diamond wanted to say, well, we, the bank, are going to determine what we think is a fraud claim that we think should be reimbursed. What I need to see is I need to see the number coming in on the front end. And that is how many customers held up their hand, called the bank, and said, I have a fraud complaint with Zelle. It's not hard. I presume you guys collect this information.
We do.
What's your number?
0.07 on fraud, 0.05 on customers raising their hand.
How many, I'm sorry, I just need a real number. How many customer complaints have you received of fraud on the Zelle system since 2018?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I will get it to you by the end of the day.
Anybody else? Mr. Jimchak?
I know the percentages. 6 basis points of scams and fraud. Fraud is
as
much
you
less.
Define it, right?
Total disputes are 6 basis points.
You know, what troubles me here is the one person who gave us numbers. The numbers are pretty alarming. And the overall numbers are enormous. we know of at least $500 million in transactions. May not seem like a lot of money to you, but to the person who just lost $450, it's a lot of money to them. So let me ask this the other way around. This would not be the same kind of problem if the bank stood behind the product. After all, you're the ones who invented it, you're the ones who made it work, you're the ones who profit off it. And then when customers say, I've got a problem, you say, I'm only going to reimburse a narrow slice of those who hold up their hands and say that they have been defrauded on this system. But we could fix that problem right now in this committee. If you would all be willing to say, or any of you would be willing to say, if a customer is defrauded on Zelle and they come and complain to the bank, then the bank will make it good. Let's do this one by a show of hands. Who is willing to make that commitment to your customers?
Senator, we are working, the owners of EWS are actually working. We are a closed network owned by banks, so you're exactly correct that we have an ability to make a difference here, and we are working on an answer to your question. We're in the throes of figuring it out. Now, let me continue, please. Zelle is one of the P2P networks that you highlight. The others have 15 times the number of disputes coming into our company that we have no ability to have insight into.
Let me just finish here, if I can, please. I just want to say on this, you tell me you are so much better than the others, and yet you've had 2.5 months to bring the data forward, and you have not produced any numbers on this. I'm sorry, your credibility right now is riding at zero. You created the perfect weapon for criminals to use, and they have used it, and you have not stood behind your customers. Look, you are inviting
Senator Warren, your time has
expired.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since it was created by Congress just over 10 years ago, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, has forced financial institutions to return more than $13 billion directly to people they cheated. This is government that works for the people, literally. Now, the banks don't like losing $13 billion. They don't like being forced to shut down scams. So they and their Republican friends attack the CFPB. And the latest attack has come out of the Republicans' go-to court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. This court has ruled that the CFPB's funding structure is unconstitutional because it does not receive annual appropriations from Congress. So I just want to test that out a little bit. All of you are here today from major regulators that oversee various pieces of the financial system: the OCC, the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, and the National Credit Union Administration. So let me start with you. Acting Controller Sue, is the OCC funded from the annual appropriations process?
No.
Chairman Harper, does NCUA receive most of its funds from the annual appropriations process?
No.
Acting Chairman Groenberg, is the FDIC funded from the annual appropriations process? And Vice Chair Barr, is the Fed funded from the annual appropriations process?
No.
So, in fact, I want to focus just a little bit more on the Fed. Vice Chair Barr, the Fed primarily gets its funding from earnings and assessments from the Federal Reserve banks. Is that exactly the same source where the CFPB gets its funding?
Yes.
So look, there is a good reason why Congress created independent funding structures for bank regulators. Your agencies are the cops on the beat that ensure the safety and the stability of the banking system. Your rules provide the guidebooks for financial institutions to serve consumers while acting within the law. Congress understood this even back in 1863 with the very first banking regulator, that if the ability of our regulators to do their jobs fluctuated every time Congress negotiated a spending bill or every time Congress changed hands, that the financial markets would be thrown into chaos. Vice Chair Barr, your job is to make policy, not to worry about the Fed's budget. But let me ask, does the Fed's independent funding structure help provide certainty and stability to banks and financial markets because no one in the system has to worry about the Fed's ability to do its job or to have the resources to enforce the rules?
Yes, I believe that kind of certainty is quite important to doing our job effectively.
Well, unfortunately, the Fifth Circuit's argument implies that because all of you are and always have been funded outside the annual appropriations process, that all of your agencies are unconstitutional. This would mean that none of you can do the things that you are doing, from setting interest rates at the Fed to making sure that when people make deposits in their banks that they are protected by FDIC insurance. And it is not just your agencies. Numerous other government entities are also funded outside the appropriations process, including the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the Farm Credit Administration, and the Financial Stability Oversight Council. By the Fifth Circuit's logic, they would also be unconstitutional. Not only does that make no sense, it is also not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says, and I'll quote it here, "No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law." And no money is withdrawn from the Treasury to fund any of our financial regulators. As Professor Noah Feldman notes, the Supreme Court has repeatedly and reasonably said that this clause, quote, means simply that no money can be paid out of the Treasury unless it has been appropriated by an act of Congress. For this reason, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and a slew of district courts have all upheld the CFPB's funding structure. Even though this decision out of the Fifth Circuit is not grounded in law, it could have real consequences for the stability of our financial system. The Mortgage Bankers Association understands this risk. In 2019, they warned that if the CFPB were struck down, quote, the results could be catastrophic for the real estate finance industry. The Trump court ruling is not only shockingly dumb, it is also dangerous. That's what happens when courts play politics instead of following the law.